"You're in the wrong place. This lounge is for registered guests only. I'm going to need you to leave." The words arrived without warning, the way a slap does, flat certain. Loud enough for the marble lobby of the Ashford Grand to carry them halfway to the revolving door. Renata Cole did not move. She was sitting in the fourth armchair from the left in the hotel's private executive lounge, a low, cream-colored chair beside a floor-to-ceiling window that looked out over downtown Atlanta. She had been there for 11 minutes. She had a glass of still water on the table beside her, untouched. She had a slim leather folio open across her knee. She had not spoken to anyone. She had not asked for anything. She had simply sat down, in the way a person sits down when they belong somewhere and do not feel the need to announce it. Standing over her was a man named Bryce Lennox, 31, head of guest relations at the Ashford Grand, Atlanta's most expensive hotel. He was well dressed in a dark grey suit that someone had pressed carefully that morning. His hair was neat. His cufflinks were polished. His face wore the particular expression of a man who had decided something before he finished the sentence. Renata Cole looked up at him. She was 38 years old. She wore dark jeans, clean white sneakers, and a grey pullover that could have come from any department store in the country. No jewelry, except a thin watch on her left wrist, no logo anywhere visible. Her hair was pulled back without effort, the kind of pulled back that happened because she had something else to think about. She looked to Bryce Lennox and to everyone else in the lounge that afternoon, like someone who had wandered in from the general lobby by mistake. She had not. "I'm sorry," I said. She said, "Bryce's," voice slightly the practiced kind of lowering that still carries to everyone nearby. "This is the Ashford Executive Lounge. It's reserved for guests with premier membership access or suite-level bookings. I'll need to ask you to gather your things." Renata held his gaze. "I have access," she said. Bryce gave a small smile, the kind designed to communicate patience while delivering its opposite. "I'm sure there's been some confusion. Could I see your room key or membership card?" Renata reached into her folio and produced a matte black key card. She held it out. Bryce took it. He held it at an angle, as if looking for something wrong with the plastic. Then he handed it back without walking it to the card reader 6 feet away at the lounge entrance. "I don't recognize this format," he said. "It may have been issued in error." A woman sitting 2 chairs to the left, Pauline Hartwell, 55, a real estate attorney from Charlotte, looked up from her laptop. Her eyes moved from Bryce to Renata and back again. She said nothing, but she watched. At a small table near the coffee station, a man named Douglas Crane, 49, a sales director from Phoenix. He took in Renata's sneakers, her pullover, the absence of visible luggage tags or a laptop bag. He looked back at his phone. The conclusion he reached was not complicated. "I'd like you to scan it," Renata said. Bryce blinked once. "Ma'am, I've been managing this lounge for 4 years. I know our access levels." "Then you know where the reader is." The sentence was quiet. It did not rise. It did not shake. But something in it made Pauline Hartwell set her pen down. Bryce's jaw shifted. He was not accustomed to being redirected. He was accustomed to being thanked for his patience, which was the polished way people thanked him for making them feel small enough to leave. "If you obtained this key through an employee arrangement or a partner program," he said, "those don't extend to executive lounge privileges. I wouldn't want you to be embarrassed." "I'm not embarrassed," Renata said. She placed the keycard on the table beside her water glass. She returned her attention to the folio, not dramatically, not as a performance, simply because she had work to do, and the conversation, in her assessment, had reached the part where facts would handle themselves. Bryce stood there for a moment, caught between the irritation of being ignored and the social calculation that came with every public interaction in a hotel lobby. Around him, the lounge held perhaps 14 guests. Laptops, drinks, quiet conversations. A few people had looked up. A few had looked away. The atmosphere had the particular tension of a room that was pretending not to pay attention. "Ma'am," Bryce said. His voice had dropped the warmth now. "I'm going to have to insist." Douglas Crane set his coffee down. He was not a man who started arguments, but he recognized authority being performed, and he found it satisfying to watch from a safe distance. Pauline Hartwell had stopped pretending to type. A younger woman near the window, Imani Reed, 27, a marketing associate from Chicago, traveling for a conference, had been watching from the beginning. She had felt the shape of the moment before she could name it. Her phone was in her hand. It had been there for the last 2 minutes. Renata looked up from her folio. "Mr. Lennox," she said. Bryce stopped. He had not introduced himself. His name was on a small lapel pin on his left breast pocket, and she had read it the way she read everything, quietly, once, without making a show of it. "The card in front of you carries the Ashford Premier Founder Access tier," Renata said. "That tier does not appear in your standard guest management system because it was created before the current system was implemented. If you walk that card to the reader and enter the secondary verification code, it will confirm full lounge access, full floor access, and complimentary service on any Ashford property in the country." Bryce stared at her. "Or," she said, returning her eyes to the folio, "you can continue standing there." The lounge was very quiet. Pauline Hartwell had her pen in her hand but was not writing. Imani Reed's thumb had found the edge of her phone's record button, but she hadn't pressed it yet. Douglas Crane was watching Bryce the way a man watches a coin toss. Bryce Lennox made a decision. It was the wrong one. "I'm going to need to call my supervisor," he said. His voice had recovered its professional coating. "Out of an abundance of caution, until this is resolved, I'm going to have to ask you to wait in the main lobby." Renata did not reach for her bag. "You're asking me to leave a space I have documented access to, while you verify whether I have access to it. It's standard procedure." "No," she said, and her voice had the same temperature it had carried since the beginning. "It's a conclusion dressed as procedure." Pauline Hartwell looked at the woman beside her. For a moment, she saw not a woman in a grey pullover, but something else, something she could not yet explain. Bryce stepped closer. "Ma'am, I'm not going to ask again." "No," Renata said. "You're going to call your supervisor. I'd recommend you do that now." Bryce pulled the small radio from his jacket pocket. He spoke into it with the controlled urgency of a man performing competence. "This is Lennox in the executive lounge. I need a manager on site. Guest verification issue." The phrase guest verification issue moved through the room like a quiet alarm. Not because it was loud, but because everyone in that lounge understood what it meant. It meant someone is where they shouldn't be. It meant I have already decided and I need backup to make it official. Renata turned a page in her folio. Her handwriting was small and precise, the kind developed by someone who had spent years taking notes in rooms where no one offered to take them for her. Douglas Crane leaned back in his chair and watched the door. Imani pressed record. The woman who arrived 4 minutes later was named Cecile Thorne, 44, Director of Hotel Operations for the Ashford Grand Atlanta. She wore a charcoal blazer, a hotel lanyard, and the expression of someone who had been managing difficult situations since before Bryce Lennox was in the industry. She had been briefed in 14 words through the radio and had formed a picture. The picture was not entirely accurate. "Good afternoon," she said, addressing herself to Renata first, a professional reflex. Then she looked at Bryce. "What's the situation?" Bryce spoke before Renata could. "Guest is claiming Premier Founder access, but the card format is non-standard, and I couldn't verify it through the system." Cecile looked at the black keycard on the table. Something in her face shifted. It was not much, a slight tightening near the eyes, a half-breath caught. But Imani, who was still recording from near the window, caught it. "May I?" Cecile said, reaching for the card. Renata nodded once. Cecile picked it up. She turned it over. She read the raised text along the lower edge that Bryce had not examined closely enough to notice. Then she looked at Renata for the first time with full attention. "Mrs. Cole," she said. Bryce went still. Renata looked at Cecile. Her expression had not changed since the beginning of the conversation. It held the same quality it had when Bryce first stood over her. A kind of patience that was not passive, not angry, but deeply, deliberately awake. "Your card is absolutely valid," Cecile said. "You have full access to this lounge and all associated services. I apologize for any inconvenience." Bryce's mouth opened. Renata placed one hand flat on her folio. "Tell me something, Miss Thorne." Cecil waited. "Your employee had access to a card reader 6 feet from where we're standing," Renata said. "He chose not to use it. He asked me to leave the lounge so that the question of whether I belonged here could be decided somewhere I wasn't watching." "Is that also standard procedure?" The room had stopped pretending to be busy. Douglas Crane set his phone face down on his knee. Pauline Hartwell folded her laptop closed. Cecile chose her next words the way a person chooses footing on uncertain ground. Mr. Lennox followed Protocol 4. "He didn't scan the card," Renata said, not loudly, with the same steady attention she had given every sentence since the beginning. "The protocol you're describing is whatever happened after he decided I didn't belong here. That decision came first. The procedure came second." Bryce shifted his weight. "I was doing my job. You were doing your assumption," Renata said. "They're not the same job." Pauline pressed her lips together. She had been an attorney for 26 years. She had watched courtrooms and boardrooms and conference calls where one person's certainty flattened another person's truth. She recognized the architecture of what was happening. She was not proud of the 2 minutes she had spent looking at her laptop while it happened. Cecile looked at Bryce. Something in her expression had changed. Not yet the full weight of consequence, but the beginning of it. The place where responsibility starts to separate from excuse. "Mrs. Cole," she said, turning back. "What can we do to?" "Nothing yet," Renata said. She reached into the inside pocket of her pullover and removed her phone. She opened a contact and held it to her ear. The lounge heard one ring, then a voice. "You're already dialed in," the voice said. "We saw the flag on the property system 12 minutes ago." Renata's eyes moved to Bryce. "Then you know what I need. Full incident documentation, employee identification, any surveillance footage from the access area, and legal standing by. Already done." She ended the call. She placed the phone on the tray table beside her water glass. She looked at Cecile Thorne. "Miss Thorne," she said, "do you know who owns this hotel?" Cecile's expression told the room she was beginning to. Bryce Lennox stood in the lounge he had managed for 4 years and felt the floor rewrite itself under him. Renata Cole was the founder and chief executive officer of Cole Meridian Capital, a private equity and technology investment firm that 14 months earlier had completed a majority acquisition of the Ashford Hotel Group. All 9 properties. The flagship Atlanta location, the operating agreements, the brand licensing, the management contracts. All of it, the acquisition had been finalized quietly, the way large things often are, without press releases or lobby announcements. The kind of deal that appeared in the financial pages for 2 days and then disappeared into the background of the world, where it continued to matter enormously to everyone who understood what it meant. Bryce Lennox had not understood. He understood now. His face went through several stages. They happened quickly, and none of them were dignified. First, the disbelief, the instinctive refusal that the mind produces when reality doesn't match its predictions. Then the recognition, arriving like cold water. Then the particular kind of fear that is not about physical danger, but about having been fully, publicly, irrevocably wrong in front of an audience that had seen every second of it. Cecile Thorne set her hands at her sides. She was a careful professional, and even now, in the middle of this, her face was composed, but her hands gave her away. They had pressed flat against her thighs in the way hands do when a person is trying hard to stay steady. "Mrs. Cole," she said. Her voice was controlled. "I want to be completely transparent with you. I was not aware of." "I know," Renata said. "I should have. You should have let your employee do the job he said he was doing," Renata said, not unkindly, with precision. "You should have verified the card before supporting the removal. You confirmed access only after you recognized the tier. The sequence matters." Cecile absorbed that. She did not argue. There was nothing to argue with. Douglas Crane rubbed a hand over his jaw. He had watched the whole thing from his table near the coffee station. He had been telling himself for the past 12 minutes that it wasn't his business. He had been telling himself the hotel staff probably knew something he didn't. He had been finding polite reasons to stay in his chair while a woman was being pushed toward the door for no reason he could actually identify. He reached for his phone now and opened his camera, too late to be a witness before it mattered, he thought. He could at least be one now. Imani Reed had been recording for several minutes. Her hand was steady, but her chest wasn't. She was 27 years old, and she had grown up watching adults explain away exactly this kind of thing. The way an institution closes ranks around its own mistake, dresses it in the language of procedure, asks the person who was wronged to be reasonable, while the people who were wrong reconstruct their dignity. She had watched it in schools, in stores, in offices. She had not expected to watch it in a hotel lounge on a Tuesday afternoon, with her conference badge still around her neck. She kept recording. Port Hartwell stood up. It was a small movement. She simply rose from her chair and walked to stand at the edge of the conversation, not to intervene, not to speak, to make visible her presence as a witness. 26 years of legal training had taught her that sometimes the most important thing a person can do in a room is to refuse to be furniture. Renata noticed her. She noticed Douglas with his phone raised. She noticed Imani by the window. She looked at each of them, not with gratitude exactly, but with acknowledgement. The recognition one person extends to another when they have done something small that required something more than was strictly necessary. Then she looked at Bryce. He was still standing in the lounge. He had nowhere logical to go. No script in his 4 years of training had prepared him for this version of this situation. He was used to the version where the person being asked to leave left. He had no experience with the version where they stayed, and stayed correctly, and the room rearranged itself around the staying. "Mr. Lennox," Renata said. He looked at her. "Walk to the card reader," she said. "Scan the card." His hands moved before his pride could finish objecting. He crossed the 6 feet to the entrance panel, took the matte black card from Cecile's extended hand, and held it to the reader. The reader chimed once. A small green light appeared above the panel. Pauline Hartwell exhaled. The light was just a light. A small electronic confirmation of a fact that had been true for the entirety of the conversation. But in the silence of the lounge, with 12 people watching, it had the weight of a verdict. Bryce handed the card back to Cecile. He did not look at Renata when he did it. Renata held out her hand toward Cecile, who placed the card in it without speaking. Renata set it back in her folio, in the same interior sleeve where it had started. "Mrs. Cole?" Cecile began. "An apology is appropriate," Renata said, "and I'll accept one. But I want to be clear about what I'm accepting an apology for." The room listened. "Not for being mistaken," Renata said. "Mistakes happen. I'm accepting an apology for what happened after the mistake." The card was on the table. The reader was 6 feet away. Instead of verifying, your employee asked me to relocate, while the question of my right to be here was settled somewhere I couldn't watch. That is not a mistake in identification. That is a choice about who gets the benefit of the doubt. Cecile Thorne was a composed woman. She had spent 19 years managing luxury properties and the people inside them. She had handled crises, complaints, collapses, medical emergencies, weddings gone wrong, and wiring failures on New Year's Eve. She was not someone who was easily moved, but standing in the executive lounge of the Ashford Grand Atlanta on a Tuesday afternoon, she felt something move. "You're right," she said. "I'm sorry. Genuinely." Bryce stared at the floor. He had no idea what to do with his hands. Renata looked at him. He was 31 years old, and he had made a decision in about 4 seconds that had taken 12 minutes to finish unraveling. She did not feel triumph. She had felt that kind of moment before, and she had learned a long time ago that winning this particular argument was one of the least satisfying victories a person could accumulate. What it left behind was not satisfaction. It was exhaustion, the particular fatigue of having had to prove something that should never have been in question. "Mr. Lennox," she said. He looked up. "Why didn't you scan the card?" He opened his mouth. He closed it. He was thinking of the right answer, and somewhere in the search for the right answer, the true one surfaced. "I had already decided," he said. The words came out quieter than he intended. Small. Honest in the way that honesty sometimes arrives when all the other options are gone. "Yes," Renata said. "You had." She sat back in the cream-colored chair. The afternoon light was still coming through the floor-to-ceiling window. Atlanta was still moving 14 floors below. The lounge was quiet in the way rooms get quiet after something real has been said. Douglas Crane lowered his phone. He did not put it away. Imani Reed kept recording for another few seconds, then gently lowered her hand, not because it was over, but because what needed to be captured had been. Pauline Hartwell sat back down in her chair. She opened her laptop, then she closed it again. She looked at Renata. "I want to apologize too," she said. "I saw it happening and I stayed in my seat." Renata looked at her. "You got up eventually. That's not the same as getting up when it mattered." "No," Renata said. "But most people never get up at all." Pauline held that for a moment. It was neither comfort nor absolution. It was accurate. She tucked it somewhere she would carry for a long time. Cecile Thorne pulled out her own phone and stepped slightly apart from the group. Her voice was low, but not low enough. "Yes, this is Thorne at the Atlanta property. I need to open a formal conduct review for an incident in the executive lounge. Employee ID BL3T147. Yes, it involves a Premier Founder access holder." A pause. Then, "I'm aware. Please send the documentation protocol to my address. We'll also need to review lounge protocol company-wide, effective this week." Bryce heard company-wide and understood what was coming. Not just an incident report. Not just a write-up in his file. An audit of the policy. A review of the procedure. The kind of documentation that does not stay private, that moves upward and outward. That becomes the example used in training sessions for the next 3 years. He thought about the green light above the card reader. He thought about how long it had taken him to walk 6 feet. Renata had not raised her voice once. She had not threatened. She had not named herself until the moment required it, and even then she had let the card carry the name. She had stayed in her chair. She had stayed in her chair and asked a simple question. Scan it. And the refusal to do that one simple thing had built the entire structure of the afternoon. Renata Cole sat in the 4th armchair from the left and opened her folio to the page she had been on, when Bryce Lennox stood over her and said she did not belong. She picked up her pen. She wrote for several minutes. No one disturbed her. After a while, a new member of the lounge staff appeared. A young woman named Amara, early 30s, with a calm manner and a professional warmth that was genuine rather than performed. She approached Renata the way a person approaches a conversation they want to go well. "Mrs. Cole," she said, "can I bring you anything? We have a new single origin pour-over this week, Ethiopian, very clean finish." Renata looked up. "Yes," she said. "Thank you. My pleasure." And she meant it. That small difference. The difference between service performed out of obligation and care, extended because a person deserved it, was not lost on anyone still in the lounge. Douglas Crane looked at the card reader by the entrance. He thought about the 7 seconds it took to scan a card. He thought about how many times he had been the person who did not scan the card, not in a hotel, not in a lounge, but in a meeting room, in a hiring conversation, in the half-second before he introduced himself to someone. Knew the snap of a conclusion before the evidence was in. He thought about that for a long time. Later, when the corporate compliance report came back, the findings were not complicated. They did not require interpretation. They stated, plainly, what the afternoon's events had already made clear. A valid access holder had been asked to leave a facility she had rightful access to without verification, based on a judgment made before any verification was attempted. The gap between the judgment and the verification was the entire problem. Everything else was downstream. Bryce Lennox was placed on suspension pending a mandatory retraining and conduct review. The lounge access protocol was revised. A new standard was implemented across all 9 Ashford properties requiring physical verification before any access dispute could proceed to escalation. Cecile Thorne wrote the policy herself. She stayed late to do it. She wanted to write it in language that didn't leave room for the thing that had happened to happen again. She was not certain it was enough. She wrote it anyway, because the alternative was doing nothing, and she had spent enough of the afternoon watching what doing nothing looked like. Imani Reed uploaded her video that evening from her hotel room, 2 floors below the executive lounge. She did not add a caption designed for virality. She wrote 3 sentences. This happened this afternoon at a hotel in Atlanta. The woman in the gray pullover owns the hotel. The man who asked her to leave did not scan her card. That was all. The video did not need more than that. By morning, it had been seen by a number of people large enough to matter. Pauline Hartwell thought about the moment for the entire flight home to Charlotte. She thought about the 7 minutes between when she had noticed what was happening and when she had stood up. She was not a woman who spent much time on regret. She believed in forward motion, in action, in the next available opportunity to do better. But she permitted herself those 7 minutes in the air. She sat with them. She let them mean something. She called her junior associate from baggage claim and said, "Next time we're in a room and something feels wrong, say something earlier." Both of us. Her associate asked what had prompted this. Pauline thought about how to explain it. Finally, she said, "I watched a woman stay seated when every pressure in the room was designed to make her stand. She never moved. She just waited for the facts to catch up." Her associate was quiet for a moment. Then they said, "Did the facts catch up?" Pauline pulled her suitcase off the belt. "They always do," she said. "The question is whether anyone is paying attention when they do." Renata Cole took a late flight back to New York. She sat in seat 3A, which was first class, which she had paid for, which no one questioned. She ordered water, still. She opened her folio. She spent the flight the way she spent most flights. Reading, making notes, thinking about problems that required her attention. Before landing, she wrote 1 line at the bottom of the page she had been working on that afternoon in the lounge, the page she had returned to after Bryce Lennox finally scanned the card. She wrote, "The cost of making someone prove they belong is paid by everyone in the room." She looked at it for a moment. Then she closed the folio, tucked it into her bag, and watched the lights of New York come up through the window. She had been in that room before. She had been in 100 rooms like it. She knew she would be in 100 more. That knowledge no longer surprised her or broke her. It only sharpened her, the way repeated pressure sharpens the thing that refuses to be made smaller. The plane touched down. Renata Cole picked up her bag, walked off the aircraft, and returned to the work of building things in rooms that had not yet learned to expect her.